Chapter 14, Basic Training, Summer 1999. Mondo had gone into prison as a kid, but he came out as a man. He was 18 years old and a proud high school graduate. While he was locked away in the youth authority, the world had changed. His church-going mom had left his dad and took his younger brother and sister to Oklahoma City. Though Mondo wanted to stay in Salinas with his dad and close to Alyssa, his parents and the state parole office decided he'd be better off in God-fearing Oklahoma, far from the malevolent influences of Salinas. He paroled in August. When he arrived at his mom's house, the first thing he did was call Alyssa. He was dying to get back to Salinas and to her. There was no feeling in the world like making love to your girl after a long lockup, and he was ready to take her in the way a dry sponge took in water. But he was stuck in Oklahoma. He decided she would come east and live with him. He imagined her arrival. He'd fill his entire being with her. And then, after they spent days sneaking into bed, wherever and whenever they could, they'd talk about the future, where they live, when she'd start school. When she spoke, Alyssa sounded as excited as she felt. She couldn't wait to join him in Oklahoma. She had a few things to get together, family and work things, but those would only take a couple weeks. He was impatient as hell, but elated in his waiting. Her family didn't exactly approve of him, and while he'd expected, hoped, she'd say yes to joining him, he knew they wouldn't be thrilled. She was close to them, and yet she didn't hesitate to admit she longed to be with him and would uproot for him, and knowing that made him savor the daydreams of her arrival as much as he suffered through her absence. They spoke often. He called again to ask when she planned to hit the road, and her sister answered. She told him Alyssa had suddenly packed and left. The sister said she didn't know where she was going, but Mondo smiled, knowing she wouldn't have told her family he was her destination. He wouldn't sleep until she walked through his front door. The days of waiting passed, at first as slow and eventless as they did in YA, with the prospect of freedom dangling at the end, except now he faced not freedom but love. More days passed and then he worried. Did something happen to her along the way? He phoned her house. Hesitant voices told him she wasn't home, but said nothing more. It frustrated him, but he was used to that. The people closest to him, including his own family, feared his temper so much that they'd avoid saying the things that really mattered, which of course made him angrier. He tried not to trip, but it was hard not to trip. People were tough to read, and trust didn't come easy. How could it? After he lost the best friend in what should have been a simple robbery. After Roy's family blamed him for everything. After he spent his formative years in dungeons like Preston and OH Close, where he learned to count on no one but himself. And here he was counting on someone, placing all his happiness and his future in Alyssa's hands, for her to cradle like a delicate baby bird that she had the power to nurture or crush. This, he realized, was trust. It was hard to trust. He knew that in Alyssa's case, any form of distrust was irrational, and he fought to keep it in check because his happiness hinged on how well he learned to have faith in her. He made himself calm down. She couldn't lie to him if her life depended on it. It just wasn't her. She couldn't wait to see him, and her desire was every bit as strong as his. He distracted himself with thoughts of what to do when he set eyes on her. He would hold her the way he did during visits at YA, so tight they'd feel molded into one whole being that could not possibly come apart. Or maybe he wouldn't speak a word, just take her in his arms and touch his lips to hers, real soft at first. Then he'd give her the longest, warmest, deepest French kiss she'd ever felt. During visits, kissing had become an art. He kissed deliberately, slowly, completely losing himself in those holy 5 seconds at the beginning and end of a visit. Kissing to him was every bit as profound as lovemaking, and when he got to enjoy it, he felt himself swept away, as if he'd fallen into the rush of a giant river that would not let him go. He worried more, and though he knew he shouldn't, he called again. Her cousin answered. He asked about his girl. The cousin sounded confused. What's wrong with her? He wondered. The mark on his forehead darkened, but the flush came more from fear than anger. The cousin sounded worried. Didn't she tell you? She asked. Tell me what? Mondo asked, his anxiety rising. The cousin took a deep breath before telling Mondo that Alyssa didn't live there anymore. He smiled. Yes, his girl really was on her way to him. He laughed and played along. So where is she? He asked. He understood from the apologetic sound of the girl's voice that what she said had to be true. Alyssa had enlisted in the military. She was sorry and had been afraid to tell him, but Alyssa was on her way to basic training in South Carolina.